Hello, friends. I am Avonelle Wing with the O Lab at Carnegie Mellon, and this is our inaugural episode of O Lab and Friends. We are starting a new Twitch streaming project, and I'm excited that you've decided to join us. I am here with Meguey Baker, who is a game designer, a historian, and a teen advocate, and also one of my favorite people to talk to about making and doing and thinking. Um, so, Meg, do you want to introduce yourself a little more?
Sure. This is very exciting. You are also one of my favorite people to talk to about thinking and making and doing. Um, I think about a lot of different things. I've been involved in gaming for 30 years or so at various levels. I work as a um, tutorial assistant in a local history museum, and I work as a consultant in a lot of other local history museums in the Pioneer, Connecticut River Valley. Um, and I teach LARP at the local 7th to 12th grade high school. So that's a little bit more context for me.
So, teaching LARP to middle schoolers and high schoolers sounds like a lot of fun, but also really fraught. I'm gonna latch onto that because I'm a LARPer at my heart. Talk to me a little bit about that. Why that age group, and why LARP?
Okay, so why that age group is because that's the school. The Four Rivers Charter Public School is a free public school with a charter that is specifically about expeditionary learning. It's the expeditionary learning model. So it's massively intersectional, interdisciplinary, trying to make every subject connect to every other subject. Um, and a lot of learning by doing, being outside, being in the community, doing all kinds of things. Every year, the senior class uh, creates, like, researches, writes, directs, films, edits an original documentary dealing with the environment and climate change and energy use and things like that. But they pick their topic and do that. It's amazing. And our kids go there. Um, so that's why that age group, really. And it's, let's see, lost track. It's been at least 8 years that I've taught LARP there now, um, because there was an interest. It started, this was a student there in 8th grade, and they are now a couple of years out of college. Um, and every Wednesday block of time during the school day, the last half of the school day, that is student run clubs, student initiated clubs. They're like,
Right.
I want to do I want to do a thing about this, and then they're responsible for finding a faculty member that will sort of sign off on it, and any community people that will agree to be part of it if they need anybody. So that's how I got started in it. First was by being the community person who would come and supervise a LARP club. Um, and then it grew and grew and grew from that point. Now that's when school is person,
Right.
that's where I am every Wednesday, is teaching that. And then in a year when we have 2 solid weeks, the week before Thanksgiving break and the week before spring break, where it's only intensives. And so I'm with the kids from 8 to 3 every single day, um, just doing LARP, which is phenomenal.
What's your favorite part of that process?
Um, wow, there's not a piece of it that I don't love, but my favorite part of it is the emergent storytelling that the kids do. That there's always kids who are in leadership positions, in not necessarily the fiction, but in making it happen. Usually it's sort of 10th and 11th grade kids, because the 7th and 8th, the younger kids are still kind of acclimating to everything, and the seniors are usually involved with, they've got a lot of other stuff to do with their senior expedition projects and things. I love watching kids such initiative and ownership of a space and saying, here's what we think is important, here's what we want to do, here are the skills we want to pass down. And there's a tremendous sense of passing things down in larp community in Four Rivers over the past 8 years, because everybody knows that the people who are in that leadership place are there for a year, maybe 2, and then
Right.
it must pass down to other people. So there's a really wonderful space of cultivating leadership in each other and recognizing people coming up as like, oh, this person's really good at this part. I love everything about that, and I love in the game, in the fiction, I love the parts where there's spontaneous world building and storytelling, and recognizing that this is what we always all do all the time, um, and that putting structure over that can make it better. Um, I also love watching people wrestle with iteration on design. So people who start out as participants in 7th grade and go through, LARP club in 7th grade or 8th grade and 9th grade, and then we're like, okay, what worked? What didn't work? What do I want to do differently? And that's led to just really, really great conversations with the students about how to iterate on things, how to make changes to emphasize different parts of the experience. We've done a ton of different stuff, but the one that we did most recently was really powerful because we only had 2 days. It was the last last 2 days of school in June, or well, in the last full week. It was like Thursday and Friday. Instead of we didn't have any big long club, we didn't have a ton of other stuff we don't usually have, and the drive of these kids coming out of a global pandemic to have that experience, and then
Wow.
the support of the faculty. Yeah, really wow. I had 15 kids. I usually I have up to 25, but because of keep trying to keep groups smaller.
Right.
Um, yeah, so we had 15 kids, and it was phenomenal. And the way that the school stepped up, and like all the faculty and staff, so enthusiastic for this to happen, and figuring out a way to give these kids a really meaningful experience with a 2-day LARP. And it went
Wow.
great, and I loved it. But part of that was iterating on the process of recognizing that what are the limitations under COVID safety? And for a LARP in June that's going to be hot, what do we need for basic safety in terms of water and bathroom access and shade and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And because of COVID restrictions and like shift, we had this beautiful, I think it was probably easily 30 by 30 tent, like one of these giant tents
Right.
that had been there. Yeah, like we've all seen, that had been there for a year, semi-permanent installation for use by the school. And we got to use that for our LARP, and to just rearrange everything underneath of like, okay, this is going to be art, and this is going to be the feast hall, and this is going to be the little, the little sanctuary in the corner, like just really getting people involved in using the whole space, and layering their imagination over the things that were there. But one of the other major restrictions was usually, I mean, it's buffer LARP. The kids love, I love too, but kids especially love the chance to like run around and hit each other with buffer weapons. So
Right.
it's fun, and we teach that. Elliot Baker, who's our middle child, when he was in, I think it wasn't part of a senior expedition, but part of leaving school for him was working with a student who was in, I think, a seventh or eighth grade, I think eighth grade at the time, to put together a um, whole slideshow, Google Slides presentation on how to make PVC and foam and duct tape boffer weapons up to the standards of Four Rivers LARP in terms of safety and length and all these things. And with PVC, with the COVID thing, we knew that there was a lot we couldn't do with that
Right.
sort of close quarters hand-to-hand sword fighting. So this year was entirely thrown weapons. It has to be entirely thrown weapons, and everybody had their own color code of duct tape,
Oh,
so
nice. So
that
that they had to
you didn't
reclaim their
handle.
weapons.
Yep.
Yep.
So you reclaimed your weapons, but you knew, like, instead of everybody just making a little knife and grab whatever one, um, you only touched your own
Right.
tools.
Right.
Um, it was intense, and by the time we were actually in LARP, there was beginning to be stepped down restrictions so that the state had said, if you are outside and if you are X number of feet apart and if there is plenty of airflow, you don't need to be masked the whole time. Of course, most of the students stayed masked the whole time because they're used to it.
Right.
And frankly, there is some lovely benefit if you are 15 and are not sure you want to be perceived at all. There's some comfort for having half your face hidden.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, that's, like, obviously I could talk about this for a long time. It's really cool. It's watching some of the kids uh, develop curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the kids have gone into that leadership position in LARP Club of being just like taking it on as though they are trying to GM a group of 20 kids. And that's exhausting to watch even.
Yeah.
Some of them have been teams of, like, here's 3 kids who are putting, like, just insane amounts of work into scripting stuff.
Right.
20
Right.
some odd kids, because they're like, they have like story arcs they want to hit, and like, and they have some kids that are playing NPCs, and there's like this theme and this battle, and that's exhausting also. Well, they're all students and they have homework and they have maybe after school jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But from that, two of the kids who came up through and started with me in 7th grade, and now they're seniors. Years ago, they put together just a really thoughtful curriculum for, like, how they wanted to do like, they need to know these bits about weapon safety and these bits about yes and listening to each other, and how do we build on each other's contributions to a scenario. We need to know these bits about how important it is to all be on the same page and when to make sure that everybody's included and brought along. We need to know these bits, just like all these different teaching bits. Let's talk about this way we hand off characters and how we convey, we want to convey in character. But there was this wonderful moment with that group that had to point out to them, and this is a lot of my role as a teacher in LARP, is making sure they're hitting a lot of points, talking about the structure of LARP, and like talking about emotional bleed. Thank you, Emily Careboss, for that language. Um, and making sure that they're okay afterward, because this is
Right.
a small school and they still have to all be okay afterward. There can't be, like, stuff that happens in LARP club that means that they can't get along in English class the next day.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And these 2 kids who had done such a phenomenal job of orchestrating this whole thing. In LARP, the intensives, the week-long things, were usually off campus.
Okay.
We usually wind up going, someone in the club or some community member will have enough land that we can use, a really big backyard, or,
Mhm.
somebody's, you know, space where there's enough facilities in terms of bathroom and water, but also like enough places that they can really explore, and they really love it. And I had to point out to them, like the end of the day or end of like day 4 or something, there were so many bizarre stories they could have never thought about. And this happens all the time because people will arrive on site, wherever the site is, and that will inspire them. And there
Right.
was this there was this little defunct garden with a ring of rocks and some weeds, and like for some reason some of the kids decided that that was a phoenix nest, and there became a whole little tiny side plot around with these 4 kids that were just all, one of them was literally pretending to be a like weird turkey thing that was sitting on a phoenix egg, didn't know it was a phoenix egg, thought it was it, you know, it was just hilarious. And the people who were like running the whole thing were concerned. They were like, I want, how did we get them wrapped back into the plot? I'm worried about them, like if they're not having fun and they're not engaging with this. And I had to point out to them, like, look at them, look at what's going on. They are making up amazing stuff that is a side part of the world you have created. They are having a blast. You don't, these are people you don't need to worry about. You know, they're
Right.
fully engaged doing something. Same time, a couple of the other kids created an, you know, because we always have a bunch of snacks and water and stuff. And a bunch of kids created an actual tavern. And there was this whole other plot of like, did so and so steal a bit of carpet? You know, create just this stuff that comes up. So anyway, yeah, I love it. Big fan.
I am really fascinated. So, one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing is looking at leadership models and also
Mhm.
thinking about how spaces where people have built up leadership roles also sometimes end up falling into entropy because somebody reaches a point and they stop growing, or the you calcify, the organization becomes an institution. And so this concept of these finite, very definitely limited leadership roles is really fascinating to me, that they're creating these creative, immersive, collaborative things that are so ephemeral, and they come in knowing that they have a year, and it's not a choice they're making, it's a limitation of the world that they're in, like the literal physical world is they're not going to be there in a year. Does that change what that experience looks like for them, do you think? Or how does it shape that
Um,
experience?
it's really interesting to watch people select in and out of LARP Club, because there are people in a year. There's 3 sections. So there's a fall clubs, a winter clubs, and a spring clubs. And LARP is only one of many, many options. And there are kids who will just hone in on that, and that's where they will be. And there are kids who want to be part of one, but then they won't be for a couple years. There's people who just really like the intensives, but don't really want to do the Wednesday club. On Wednesday club, they'd rather do something else. So it's really supportive of meeting people where they want to engage. So in terms of leadership model, that's one of the things I feel like it does really well from the get-go, is um, support different pathways to participation. Um, because if your only pathway to participation has a built-in expectation that eventually you'll be in a leadership role, there are people who will check right out of that because they don't want that. And if your pathway to participation is only ever as a participant, you know, not in leadership, there are people who check out of that too because they want to have the opportunity for growth and control, or putting their ideas in or whatever. So giving kids the option, giving participants the option of these different ways that they can be part of this is huge. And then I think you're exactly right that you're going in with an understanding that you can be as involved as you want to be, up to being the student leader, or it's two, sometimes it's as many as four. It's never one student leader because that's too much to put on one person. But with the understanding that that is going to be a year or two that you'll be in that leadership position, and that part of your job of being in leadership is identifying and cultivating people who are coming up behind you who might be interested or willing to be in leadership positions the following year or years. There's not an official handoff of like, I bequeath unto you LARP Club student leadership, but there is a definite persistent acknowledgement of who is showing up at
Right.
capacity. And there's no judgment around that. There's like, wow, this person is really, they have good ideas. And I really hope that's usually the language, they have really good ideas. And I really hope that they get to run LARP Club next year or
Right.
the year after. I think once there was a bungled transitionary process where the people who were running it sort of like think, oh, you're going to be really good, as you should really run LARP next year. And one of the other people was saying, oh, you should really run LARP next year. And that took a little bit of like really work on my part to like intentionally weave, you know, that those sort of disparate ideas of how it should be, weave
Right.
them back together. And it worked out, but it was a challenge.
So, one of the themes that I'm hearing, and I wonder if what this sparks for you, is that you had said earlier, one of the sentences that I wrote down is structure can make it better. And we're talking about LARP and we're talking about LARP Club. And I feel like one of the things that we're kind of skirting around is the idea that games and storytelling can be transformational, but it's not just what happens in the gameplay, but it's all the stuff that goes around it and all the awareness and mindfulness that goes into cultivating the spaces where games and storytelling can happen. I wonder if there's anything there that sparks for you.
Like one of the things that this has in it is part of a school. It's part of an educational mindset of the expeditionary learning model and interconnectivity. And there are specific things that fit in that framework about integrity and responsibility and community support, like these different values that is built on. And at the end of a regular year, after the week-long intensives, there's a whole circle, a whole school um, assembly. They
Mm-hmm.
call it it's community meeting is what it's called, but um, where each intensive gets like 3 minutes of here's what we did. So if there was a blacksmithing intensive, or hiking in the White Mountains intensive, or let's go to Broadway and see 4 different Broadway shows intensive, or LARP intensive, like they're all having a reflection back to what are the core values of the school. Um, and so that allows for LARP Club to have that same piece of how does it come back to the broader community? How do you integrate it into your own experience of learning and being a lifelong learner? And that my job and my faculty counterpart's job is to sort of create the container in which that can happen, where there can be all the play and fiction and boffing and costume design and everything like that in here. But I'm holding this container around these teenagers
Right.
to experience things, and then to integrate that back in of like, oh, what does this mean? This means that we figured out how to um, move a boulder across the field together because it was really cool to have that be like the mountain or
Right.
something,
Right.
or like we really navigated this challenging interpersonal situation that came up as a result of factions in our imaginary fiction. And having that reflective piece of like, how does this integrate back into your life? It's also part of the sort of process of going from normal time, actually like normal time, like we're hanging out here,
Right.
through into here is like a weird different time where we're in LARP and we're doing something weird, and
Yep.
then back out into normal time. So that integrative process, that self-reflective process, and then that, bringing it back into the wider world. I don't feel like that quite answers your question, but please,
No, but it
please.
sparks another question for me.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so when you are doing this with kids and you're on site and you're interacting with them, you get to help build the container and you do the scaffolding and you build the debriefing so that they have that exit ramp back into regular time. So when you're designing games for people to play outside of your sphere of influence and you're sending these games out into the world, how do you build those concepts in so that they have those toolkits? Because that seems like a huge part
Yeah,
of the process. And when you're creating something to go out into the world, how do you prepare for that? How do you set that tone?
that's powerfully good question, and it's one I think that every designer should wrestle with more, myself included. Um, my best answer is really, in so far, and this is a question I still think about a lot. My best answer so far is with game design that I've done in 1001 Nights and in The King is Dead. In 1001 Nights, I had this wonderful reaction at the beginning, because I have at the beginning of that book how to set up your space, right? To make the space you're going to play in, sort of inducive of the game you're going to play,
Mm-hmm.
and have food and have snacks and think about lighting and think about people's comfort and what you want in your space. And I remember someone encountering that and uh, writing to me saying, these are rules. This thing about like make it beautiful and have there be snacks, those are rules. I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
rules. And in The King is Dead, Vincent and I put in the end of that, like the sort of the end of it where someone is coronated and there's epilogues, and how does that work, that at least it doesn't necessarily provide the sort of now you're back in regular time, but it at least provides a end point to the game. Um, that flow into and out of the game state, uh, yeah, the coming out of the game state is a lot like, it's everything in PBTA where there's what do you do at the end of the session? There's
Mm-hmm.
end of session moves, or that we update history, or we do something in PBTA games that have that. Um, it's there for a
Hold on for
reason.
people that are watching and don't know what it is. PBTA?
Oh, sure. Powered by the Apocalypse. Apocalypse World is the game that Vincent and I wrote in 2010. And
Mm-hmm.
Powered by the Apocalypse is any game that's built with that toolbox. And I really like everything in Apocalypse World. You can think of it as a woodworking tool shop. There's so many different tools in that tool set. And so if you're making a Powered by the Apocalypse game, you're taking different tools from that toolbox, um, and employing them in different ways. Some people really like sandpaper, so their game is super smooth. And some people are really into like the hand chiseled bit, so it's all chisel and melt, because different things. But a PBTA game is a game that the designer feels our work in Apocalypse World has been influential enough on their design thinking that they want to acknowledge that by saying, yes, this is Powered by the Apocalypse. Um,
Okay, and you were saying
so
end of
yeah,
game action.
at the end of Apocalypse World and other PBTA games, there's a mechanical thing that happens that we recognize this is the end of the session. We are now done playing. for now. And something happens and like numbers change on your character sheet, or maybe you write something down. That's the end of that. But the reality is that there's like several more steps to getting out to regular time, which involves things like, when are we going to play again? And, you know, hopefully tidying up. And as I'm looking at like 3 different empty seltzer cans from gaming on Monday. And then there's like hanging out after and talking about like, oh, that was cool, or that was really terrible, or like, but I loved it. And, goofing off and like, hey, do you want to play some Jackbox games or whatever? There's this like transitionary steps back to, okay, bye, see you next week. And then you're back to regular time.
Right. Thank you.
But those can't go in the book, right? Because they're so
Right.
personal, right? Yeah.
But I do think that there's something valid about the fact that there are end steps that kind of lead you towards the wind down and the. I know that when I play a game in a campaign and something has happened and we have to truncate because real life has interfered, and we're like, okay, we're just going to do scene wrap up or update character sheets and allocate points and do experience next session. There's always this sort of weird gap in my brain where I'm like, but we didn't finish. It's not done. And so looking at the fact that if we are assuming that any game we play has the opportunity to be transformational, and we need a pad of buffer time to internalize the stuff that has happened and to transition out of transformational space. Because if we stayed in transformational space all day, every day, we'd just be ragged messes that were oozing emotion on everybody.
Well, and also the usefulness of that transformational space would decrease rapidly.
Right. And
We
so
can't live
even the
there.
process of taking apart a board game and putting the stuff back in the box feels like part of that container. And so that's an
It is,
interesting thing to look
absolutely.
at.
The same with like, yeah, precisely. The same with hitting save on a video game.
Oh, yeah.
You're acknowledging in a physical way. You must embody it in some way, even if it's just hitting a button with your thumb, that you are changing state. You are no longer playing this game. You have saved this game. And you might just be saving like, oh, quick, save first so that if I die in the next bit, I can come back. But there's a piece that's psychologically acknowledging this piece is done,
Right.
which is really important. And I think that that's like a really good thing for people to keep in mind, because you're right. If we break off early, it's weird. It's like finishing a limerick 3 lines through, and you're like, but what? Part of your brain is like hooked on that. Or not reading to the end of the chapter. You know,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
what do you mean? You can't stop there. Yeah.
And doing that deliberately, right? A cliffhanger where you're reading and you're reading and you're reading and you're like, wait, my book just ended. No, 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 my book didn't just end. Where's the next page? That has value too, but being mindful
Yeah.
about it and doing that deliberately seems really important to acknowledging the power of games.
Yeah. And it's also the power of storytelling, like that.
Mm-hmm.
All of the like role-playing games and larps, they're absolute fraternal twins. And they come from the same space, which is oral history and storytelling and playing pretend with your friends, which is like, everything does that. All mammals do that. Birds do that. You cannot convince me that little octopi, don't pretend with each other of like, hey, I'm going to be this color now. Come on. If I was an octopus, I would so do that. That would be awesome. And so that piece of storytelling, and that it has arcs, and they have to come to a completion in some way, or our brains get to a holding pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of the stuff with play, and all the stuff that I feel very strongly that it's predicated on, has these rhythmic beats of when the story is completed and when it's not. And we experience this as people all the time when we're telling anecdotes,
Yeah.
like, check out this funny thing that happened. we want to be able to tell it in a way that is fulfilling. It satisfies some part of that storytelling urge, some part of that, like, hi, Jane, the experience of life. Um, this is my very, very old cat. She's 17 and a
Hi,
half, and
Jane.
she like, meow. Um, so in that space of recognizing this is how this goes, and it's why we feel so frustrated on some levels when we have an anecdote to relate and we get to tell part of it and then something happens and it's interrupted. Our brains go like, but I was and now we feel socially awkward, right?
Right.
Do I get to say, let me finish my story, or do I just not? And we recognize it when it happens to other people too. We're like, do I say, please finish your story because my brain is still stuck on what happens next? It's really fascinating.
One of the things that I came into this conversation holding in my mind is when we were talking beforehand, you said there was a line that jumped out at me that was my underlying conviction that storytelling and playing pretend is an inalienable birthright of every living creature. And that is such a powerful sentiment. And I think that um, it's fascinating to me because I run into so many people who have this very vague attitude of, well, it's just a game, or it's just make believe, or it's just play pretend. And that one sentence elevates that beyond, well, it's just, to it is. And I'm really fascinated by the power of that transition.
Mhm.
Um, I think there are going to be people who are perplexed by the concept of every living thing. They're going to be like, okay, I can totally see it for like maybe I should engage in more storytelling, or maybe I should let myself be more playful. Um, but you expand that out beyond into all creatures. Talk to me about that a little
Mhm.
bit. Why?
Um, Okay, well, one antecedent that I can point to right away is the National Geographic children's book series that came out in the 70s, where there was like these big hardcover books. And, you know, there's one that is called Why Animals Play, that I read over and over and over as a child. Um, and there was a lot of things going, a lot of real interesting thinking going on in the 70s uh, and early 80s about play, the whole new games movement of like, what if we played differently? And what if we got adults back out onto the playground and like reconnected with how fun it is to like play some of these weird, games that we thought we had to leave behind in childhood, but we really don't. There's nothing stopping us from playing red light, green light ever. We
Right.
just don't, we stop making time for it. And so in the I actually don't remember if it's why animals play or how animals play, but um, over and over and over, these beautiful National Geographic pictures of like young wolf cubs playing, or a crow. I think we've all seen this video, sliding down a snowy roof on using a like a yogurt lid as a sled, there over and over for fun. You look at these things and there is no other explanation except that this creature is doing this behavior for fun. You cannot connect it to, oh well, this is a food seeking activity, or this is a dominance seeking activity, or this is a territorial act. No, it's just fun.
Right.
um, and then uh, looking through that lens at the world, um, it reminds me of things in archaeology, because like that's another huge piece is my history background, um, of allowing things to be just for fun. Um, not everything is a not every piece throughout history is a ritual object. Like this is almost like shorthand for conversations in the last 30 years of um, 50 years, the last 50 years of archaeological uh, exploration and conversation, is the shift from everything being every little piece you find is like, oh, it's a ritual object. Look, there was something very important about these ivory pieces, and there was symbology, and we're like, they're playing a game, So, I mean, Venus of Willendorf, love that. Did someone carve a doll for their kid? Maybe, you know,
Right. Right.
it's it's a powerful and more what we do than almost everything else. It's so easy to look at the world and look at world history through a lens of violence and war and conquest. But those are things that some people participate in at some point.
Right.
Every human child plays. Every human child. Even you're like 5 months old, laying on your back going, wow, hands, and like you're literally playing with the little flecks of light and or dust motes in the air. You discover you have toes and it's like, what is that? And you cannot stop playing with them. It's how we interpret our world. It's how we experiment with figuring things out. It's absolutely a human basic is that we play.
It's interesting. There's a parallel here happening in my head where I recently, sometime in the last couple of years, I discovered that there are people who don't have internal monologues, like they don't think in words. And then
Yeah.
that led me to discovering that there are people who don't think in pictures. And both of those blew my mind. I was just like, how? And one of the questions
I
that I
remember I remember you having that.
Oh my God. I think I
Yeah.
spent the next 6 months going, do you think in words? You don't.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you problem solve? Like if I need to solve a problem, I'll have a conversation. I'll be like, who on my committee would be the right person to ask this question? Okay, it's 3 a.m. I'm not going to call Meg, but I can have a conversation with the Meg in my head. Meg, this is my problem. And so for me, it blew my mind because I'm like, how do you think through a problem if you don't think in words? And I'm almost having
Hmm.
like a similar, like, if you take play out of people's equations and you tell them that they can't do things just because, and they can't approach things because it's fun or because it feels good or it makes them feel giddy inside, then I imagine that for people where play or fun or silliness has been completely obliterated from their toolkit, that there's a whole other set of like problem solving and how they engage with the world and how they think about things that is just different. And I don't like, I'm trying to, in the same way that I spent 3 months going, do you think in words? I'm like, without play, without fun, without risk taking that is low stakes, how would the world be different if A, we had more people that engaged in play enthusiastically and thought of everything as we could turn this into play and have fun with it. And
Mhm.
if we had fewer people who'd been told that fun wasn't theirs anymore because they're too grown up.
Right. I think the second point is a really good place to dig deeper because being told that no longer for you because you've grown up um, is something that is really intense.
Mm-hmm.
It's aberrant, like really aberrant in terms of the breadth of human history. Um, it's really only like we might even be coming out of it. It was some generations, a couple generations of that's not for you anymore. You're too grown up. Would say that's probably a early 1800s attitude, maybe 200 years old. And there are definitely avenues where it's older, and there are things where you are expected to take an adult role in society, but it doesn't mean that you put away childish things in the same way that we have interpreted it for the last couple hundred years, because there are things that we here in 2021 put in the realm of childhood did not used to be in the realm of childhood um,
For example.
because of the industrial revolution changed everything.
Okay.
For example, uh, making up songs
Okay.
um, comes to mind instantly. Like little kids will make up songs all the time. You know, this is my cat. I like my cat. My cat is silly. You know, um, if you go back into the 1700s, you always sing time. Everybody sings all the time because you're keeping rhythm with your work, and you're using song to measure time. Um, you know, need the bread for I have it in a cookbook my mom made for me, that you need the bread for one Rolling Stones song or two Janis Joplin songs. You know, it's just that's how you tell time. And so making up little songs all the time. And the place this stays to this day is parents with their children
Right.
make up songs all the time. Time to get your coat, let's go to the library, you know,
Right.
time. um but then we're told that that is a childish thing, and that we don't do that anymore.
Well, and that you have to be good at it and that it has to have purpose.
Right. And that's what I wanted to get back to your earlier, like the two pieces, the one about leaving it behind and then the other about like play and having fun. And I wanted to put other things in there about it's easy to put play and fun and make them be that they have to be the same thing. Um and we have, I think, also sitting here in 2021, really wanted those to be the same thing, and broken out practice
Mm,
or into work, that you practice something because you are working at it to get better at it with an ultimate financial goal.
right.
um, Whereas if if you're whittling, right, and you're just carving along doing things, like, now the pressure to monetize that, like, put that on Patreon or an Etsy shop or whatever, is huge, because we're living under this cloud of extractive capitalism, um, and demand that we be constantly productive. But if you put that idea of play and practice together, that a playful practice, that you can be playing at something, practicing something. It can be hard. You don't have to be good at it. You can want to get better. You can get blisters on your fingers. Um, it's still like fun and playful, and you're having that part of your brain light up that's about play, and that sort of um, dopamine hit of this is good, that I want to be doing. Um, but that play doesn't have to equate easy. And it doesn't have to equate um, simplistic. Uh, Weavers that I know, that weaving is their play and their fun, and like that is not easy work, to like warp a loom and figure out all the stuff that goes into setting up your pattern and then sitting there and weaving. That's not easy in a
And
lot of
there's so
ways,
much,
but for them it's playful.
and the practice part of that, there's so much failure and so much, oh, that didn't, whoop, my tension's all wrong, I've picked the wrong materials. And part of the learning curve and part of the process is, oh, that didn't work. As a crocheter who has taught herself to knit, there have been plenty of times where I've been deeply satisfied, and my play has been, let's make this ridiculous hat pattern. Oh, that's 3 sizes too big. All right, who's the biggest head I know?
Yeah, 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 yep, exactly that. And that um I think that there are elements of the idea that we have to put away play as a childish thing, and take on adult seriousness, um, also has layers of scarcity,
Mm.
scarcity in time, scarcity in resources, scarcity in energy, um, that a child gleefully create chalk drawings all over the sidewalk, and it's just going to get washed away.
Yep.
Don't care. They don't care. We as adults have a harder time doing things that we know are ephemeral, or we know is going to have to be picked out, or like, well, that was a neat experiment, let's unravel the whole thing and try again.
Yep.
um, it takes work it takes looking at things as a playful practice to improve that quality of um, trying things out, of play to find out, right? I don't even want to get into the, fail forward or fail, because you're not failing. There's no failure there. It is just problem solving, examining the puzzle, turning things around in your mind, like what happens if, right?
Yep.
And none of that is failure. There's no failure in that play. And um, I think that that's an important piece of this, like looking at the idea that play has to be fun or it's work, and work has to be productive.
Right.
There's some weirdness there.
So I'm now curious, what's the last thing that you played that was ridiculous and messy and glorious and fed your soul?
Oh, okay. Well, golly. Play. I'm like literally like looking around like, what am I playing? All right. So I had, let's see, it would have been 2 weeks ago. Um, and it was like a rainy, gray, drizzly week. We had a week that was 3 days of it is too hot to go outside, heat warning, don't do it. And then 4 days of it's basically just raining nonstop. And that Saturday, I had a little gathering at my house because um, I turned 50 in March, and I've been looking forward to turning 50 for 12 years. And March was not the time to have a little outdoor gathering. So I had a little outdoor gathering. We set up a badminton,
Oh,
and we played badminton. But even more than that, so that was amazing and like super goofy. We did not care who was in. We did not care where the boundaries were in terms of like the court. We did not care who got points when. It was just like goofing around, and it was
right.
wonderful. It was wonderful. And we also played bocce under a big tent because, in the rain, right? And it's like literally drizzling, which kept the mosquitoes away, which was nice.
Nice.
Um, yeah, perfect. Worked out. I'm like, why not? I'm like, this is it. I don't care. I am 50 and I'm gonna play badminton in the rain because I wanna. Why not? You know. Um, so that was really delightful. And then we also played bocce underneath one of the tents, easy up tents that I had, um, on our completely unmowed, completely ridiculous lawn because too hot to do anything, and then 4 days of rain and like utterly unpredictable, nonsense, weird bocce ball, but nothing better ever. I would do that again every. I might just move my birthday to June. Why not?
Why not? That's
So that's
fantastic.
my answer for like things that I played that were that level of just delight in the play, right? I was delighting in the company, and I was delighting in the physical activity, and I was delighting in the problem solving of like rolling the bocce ball, throwing out the first one and then rolling the other ones and like, or tossing the other ones and like, okay, is there anything I can do to control where this little hummock goes? No? Okay, we're just going to find out. We're going to play to find out, and that's going to be how it is. It was amazing.
That sounds lovely. Um, Mine is that I've been playing Zelda on the Switch. I've finally
Hmm.
started playing Breath of the Wild. And
Hmm.
it's fascinating to me because I'll comment online that I'm just terrible at the game. I'm bad at all of the reflexes and learning there are 4 triggers that you can hit, and I'm constantly like, wait, which one do I need for this? And I hit all 4 of them before I get where I'm going. And it's fascinating to me to watch people's responses to me saying I'm bad at this. Everyone shows up to
Mm,
reassure me, and I'm like, no, I'm not upset about this. I'm completely charmed by
right.
the fact that I'm inept and there's no muscle memory, and I can tell. Like when I was a kid, I learned uh, the like button combinations and had them down instantly, and I'm like, oh, my brain is not nearly as plastic as it used to be, and I'm gonna get this, but I'm failing gloriously every time. And my household, here's the death scene, and they're like, what, another rock troll? And I'm like, yep, another rock troll, it got me again. And I'm having a
So what's the
blast.
language? Yeah, yeah. And yeah, you're having a blast. So this points to me. Sorry to interrupt. Do you want to
No, that's okay. No, go
finish your
ahead.
point?
Go ahead.
Okay. Um, the this points to me to a missing piece in our language about how we talk about games and gameplay, which
Okay.
is you're not bad at it. You're not bad at the game at all. It's there for you to have fun with. You are having fun. Therefore, you are 100%. It's a successful match between
Yep.
you and this game. Perfect. You're winning at this game. How do we, like, what word do we need? What's the missing piece of our language and how we talk about games and how we talk about play around is and what bad is? Because if we use as a rubric for good that you are hit all the markers and get all the muscle memory and do all the little things, and you'll maybe there's a time constraint issue to it, or
Right.
maybe you're a completionist and you hit all the little Easter eggs or whatever. If that's the rubric for good, it cuts out so many giant swaths of people that are highly successful at the game if the game rubric is, are you having fun? Is it
Right.
playful? Is it, so what's the missing piece? What language do we need there?
That's an interesting point. It also kind of harkens back to the debates that I've seen online about whether playing in easy mode is playing for real or is that cheating. And of course it's playing for real. Like exactly.
So let me tell, I have to tell a little story back about LARP Club.
Sure.
Um, at the end of LARP, so had 2 days. We had a little bit Wednesday to prepare for, what was going to happen and how it was going to roll out, and for making weapons and talking about costuming. And then we had all day Thursday and all day Friday to be in character and do the thing. Um,
Right.
and when we finished the arc, like, okay, this is it. We've come to the conclusion of this story. We've done the epilogues. We've got hours left of the school day. Um, go for it. And like, people had a blast. Some of them dragged up the big fighty weapons and like, can we do that? Yeah, okay. But one of them was a conversation in which I was in a conversation with a handful of kids, and the question of fake fan came up, which
Oh,
goes right. Yes, exactly. Right in that same place of like, are you a real gamer? Someone said something, you know, I don't even know. I don't even recall. Just they were challenged by another student of like, oh, that's a fake fan. And I was like, hold on, there's no such thing.
right.
Is not in that. Not only does that not exist in a LARP club that I am part of and willing to help facilitate, that does not exist anywhere. If you do nothing but obsessively research how to make the food in that video game, you're a fan. If what you do is you figure out how to play the themes from that anime on your keyboard, you're a fan. If you just obsessively encyclopedically read the wiki and know every character's backstory, you're a fan. If what you do is recreate a costume from that in high detail, you're a fan. There is nothing, there is no part that is a fake fan, and I will not accept that language in LARP.
Like that goes
And
back to
like,
your tenet of meeting
there were
people
kids
where they
around
want
me
to
being like,
engage.
yes. Sorry, say
Yeah.
that again.
That goes back to your tenet of meeting people where they want to engage. Like that's foundational to what you've described as how the club is supposed to function. I'm
Yeah,
really glad that the
yeah,
kids had you to be like, oh no, we're not doing that.
not doing that. Because like, one of the things in terms of perspective for this is that, seventh to 12th graders, some of them are neurodivergent, some of them are queer, some of them are just lessons and awkward. Um, all of them are here willing to struggle together to find out how to be part of a society. And the school is very, very aware that their job is to educate the whole person for their whole life. You know,
Right.
they don't, the school is like willing to do every single thing necessary. If you're having massive dysphoria or anxiety attacks, they're like, okay, where do we meet you where you are so that you come through high school as a whole person ready to go out into whatever comes next. And so part of my job in that moment was to address that point that they will meet everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And so my hope is that the person who was like, oh, fake fan, you're a fake fan, that they heard me, like, I'm talking to you, that is not acceptable. Don't do that.
Right.
You don't need that. And I'm also talking to you, quiet person over here, who's been talking to me about the Zelda cosplay you want to do,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that without even looking at you, I'm validating you're everything because
Yep.
you need to hear that too. And so that piece of what is a serious gamer, like, what the heck, it's play, and
Right.
it's playful practice. Like, if are you enjoying what you're doing even when you are like extremely frustrated because this is a really intense boss fight? My youngest kid just did a 2.5 hour run of Risk of Rain, which is ridiculously long, like for a run of Risk of Rain that's usually like 20 minutes or thereabout, and they're like, it was insane to watch. It was so cool. Could I do that? No, I have not put in the time. So the piece there is that the play that we do in LARP or video games or anywhere have to be like, yay, feels great, because it's tough.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the muscle memory and things like that. It's hard work, but it's still, if you are choosing to do it, not being forced to do it, and like your livelihood isn't depending on it,
Right.
it's entirely different. um yeah, it's a wild thing. So like, what's a casual gamer versus a serious gamer, and like, what's a fake fan? I literally am like, I've got no use for that. um
You had a visceral physical reaction. I could see it in you when we hit that. You just had
yeah,
a, oh, no, we don't.
no, we don't. No, I don't. Nope, got no use
Well,
for it. It's Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's
I'm
an
gonna drink some water and be quiet.
I think that's an important part of curating these spaces, though, is learning how to say no, we don't on the things that are joy eaters, and rejecting joy eaters and saying we play, we practice, we have fun, we engage, but we don't limit ourselves artificially. And I think that's an important part of, and in many ways, what we've been talking about ties back into the OLAB mission of exploring where play and science and technology and play interact to better understand how we relate to the rest of the world. And so the we don't do that here is as powerful as the but here's what we do.
Right. And like, that it's not only for ourselves but for other people, right? um that that everything that happens in any space happens within a set of affordances and constraints and agreed upon uh, elements of the container. This
Yep.
is what happens here. Whether it's from the OLAB or to like this conversation we're having, or LARP club I run, or anywhere, we operate within a communicable set of parameters. And that's important.
So I'm going to wrap us up now, unless, do you have anything that you would like to add as a closing point?
Oh, this was fabulously fun. um, I hope that I hope that any folks who might have watched or listened, or um, I hope it's interesting, and I hope it's of use. That's my biggest thing, is I hope it's of use. Um, yeah.
You certainly have me thinking about a bunch of things. I have an entire page of notes of things to go back to and things to think about. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
You are more than welcome. Do it
Awesome.
again anytime.